Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to this autumn term Winter Fellows lecture for the Cañada-Blanch Centre here at the LSE. My name is Andres Rodriguez Pose and well, you in the room, you know me. The people outside may not, but I am the director of the Cañada-Blanch Centre here at the London School of Economics. And today we have a packed group of presentations, so an eventful day. And so without further ado, well, first I apologize to all the fellows for changing the day from yesterday to today through unforeseen circumstances. I'm glad that you all can make it. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Professor Anita Marra, who's a professor of political economy at the University of Naples, Federico II, pointer, and she's going to be talking about how can universities help peripheral regions innovate, applying an ecosystem approach. So you have a maximum, I think it's 20 minutes, 15 or 20 minutes a day.
It should be 15 minutes.
So 15 minutes to present.
It's up to you if you want to be cruel.
Well, now that we got dinner much later, so.
I'll try. I already announced that I will try to speak fast because I wanted to streamline the presentation. Then I realized that was too much, so I assumed that kind of a commitment to be faster.
Okay, so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to present my research that is now entitled, how can universities help peripheral regions innovate? And it's based on different studies I've conducted thus far, both quantitative and qualitative. And I have assembled these studies into a recent publication, the recent volume that reports both research and policy. But today I'm going to focus specifically on one chapter of this book, which is still evolving, and that's why I would like to receive your comments and reactions. These are the points I'm going to focus on briefly, the multiple theoretical lenses that thus far have helped us to understand the role of universities in regional development and specifically regional innovation, and mostly relating to the notion of the regional innovation ecosystem that has guided my research. And the study I'm going to talk about focuses on 8 regions in the south of Italy, seeking to explore this context exactly from this ecosystem perspective. I will report some findings, and I hope I will have time to engage in a conversation regarding implications for policy and research. So, regarding these multiple economic theories and lenses, we know perfectly well, the different contributions from the economic theory, explaining innovation dynamics and trajectories, the human capital theory recently focusing on creative and entrepreneurial talent formation, retention, attraction, but also the regional science and the economic geography perspectives, putting so much emphasis on agglomeration economies and the evolving specialization, diversification, knowledge spillovers, but also the consequences in terms of economic inequalities that innovation generates across core and peripheral regions. And as I anticipated, this regional innovation ecosystem by Guzman, by the way, we have the seminal author regarding regional science and economic geography here, Professor Rodrigo Pose, that can definitely provide some additional insights or benchmark vis-a-vis my presentation. And the regional innovation ecosystem recently has mostly emphasized this variation in research and innovation level and productivity across regions that as a base for more place-based innovation policies, which is also why focusing on universities is very important. Just to understand, the diversity of universities out there, the different role they play in knowledge and technology transfer, even though this expression I don't like specifically because it's not a unilateral or linear process. More interesting is this notion of university industry collaborations, but also the contribution in terms of education for entrepreneurship, the training that university provides in this so-called third mission or public engagement. I don't know whether it's just rhetoric or it's indeed a key mission the university fulfills. Anyway, have been recently involved into these institutional assignments, also in evaluation, where I could appreciate the place-based initiatives university takes and how the context is a key notion to consider to understand the results and the impact in the longer term. But the innovation ecosystem notion, again, underscores the proximity, not only in terms of geographical or physical context, but also in terms of institutional conditions for collaboration, the stakeholder interdependence across sectors, the feedback loops, and the adaptive learning that can be generated through policies, which are not just specific interventions, but that can build over time and stratify so that impact is kind of difficult to isolate. And again, difficult is also to understand the coordination mechanisms in this context that evolve and could evolve in response to place-based resources, capacities, and challenges. So I try to use this perspective, and to some extent I operationalize it, building on Baden and Murray from MIT and Guzman, actually, considering the different elements of the ecosystem, trying to come up with proxies adapted to the type of context that I had explored, and also identifying the metrics that I could use for the empirical analysis. So the elements are the foundational institutions, the regional innovative capacity, the entrepreneurial and corporate capacity, and regional comparative advantage. I will come back to this point if I have time later on. Just the data regarding the metrics that, I use this data to substantiate the metrics I employed in the quantitative analysis. I relied heavily on this data set, the 2020 business census conducted by the Italian National Statistic Institute. Is that it's a stratified data set covering 8 NUTS2 regions. These regions correspond precisely to the 8 regions of the south of Italy. But the data set covers 50 industries with a specification of 2 digits regarding the industry classification, with 1.25 million of firms included. And mostly these firms are small and medium-sized enterprises with very few multinationals located in the south. But this data set was also complemented with additional information regarding patenting applications, credit migration, and innovation financing dating back to 2024. So I tried to make it a little bit more recent, but I want to emphasize that since, small and medium-sized enterprises are the bulk of, or the backbone of this economic system, data are quite robust, though a little bit old. The method, 3-step econometric approach, like just regression estimates to understand the determinants of firm-level innovation, the drivers of innovation-driven entrepreneurship and the conditions enabling the scale-up of knowledge-intensive startups. But I will try to go more in depth into the characterization of these variables. This is indeed the overview of the descriptive statistics. I want to raise your attention on innovation rate. It's something that I come up with a colleague of mine, estimating this ratio of innovative firms report, the number of firms reporting innovation regarding process or product. That's the way ISTAT characterize innovative firms over the total number of firms considered in the sample. Knowledge-intensive firms, birth rate, the newborn startups within the high-tech sectors, knowledge-intensive sectors on total firms, and the survival rate considering firms in the knowledge-intensive sectors still alive after 3 years. But then I also consider, as already said, the patents, the patent applications, the private investment in research and development, the public investment, and specifically the research and development in terms of expenditure by universities, which was a more accurate metric. And I'll tell you later on why. But I also wanted to include some, let's say, ecosystem metrics, like R&D personnel in firms within the region and in the university, the productivity of labor within the region, and the number of collaborations, or the number of firms that reported collaborations, active collaborations in research and development with universities, with firms, with external actors, including other research centers or consultants. This is the range of collaborations that ISTAT records. So the first model, the first estimates regard, this independent variable, the corporate innovation rate, with respect to the list of variables in the first column of this table. As you can see, of course, there is a contribution by patents, which is put on the right-hand side of the equation. Interestingly, you have the private investment in research and development, which is negative still, though significant. I interpret this result because of the very low level of investment firms shown in the South. This means that there is not much, contribution to innovation, and university, to some extent, compensates for this lack of investment. But interestingly, when research and development personnel is within the firm, this is a positive contribution, as opposed to research and development personnel within universities. In other words, when researchers are located in firms, they actively contribute to innovating products or processes within the firm. Whereas when this important infrastructure, let's say human factor, human capital, is concentrated as it is in universities, evidently there's still disconnect between what universities can provide and what firms may need in terms of external knowledge useful for innovating production. If you look at this other model, here the dependent variable is the number of startups in the knowledge-intensive sector. And again, you have mostly the same variables. And I want to raise attention on the very lacking private investment in research and development, which is a negative factor indeed. Still showing how low the investment is. By the way, this is something that Mario Draghi has already pointed out over the past 2 years, and it's showing up again here in these figures. The university is still providing the infrastructure for the knowledge useful in terms of business development. But again, the researchers within university do not contribute that much as opposed to researchers in the field, probably because, as already pointed out, they can tap into different knowledge bases, or they can easily provide different perspectives, not just the scientific knowledge that university mostly does. And this resonates with the results also Rodrigo Pous and Wang have emphasized recently in 2025 in a paper recently published. What I also want to underscore is the role of the productivity of labor, that is to some extent a metric pointing to the effect of the ecosystem. In other words, it's a contribution, it's facilitation, if you want, that provides this positive influence on creating new startups. But if you look at these startups after 3 years, here the estimates are not so robust as previously, and the variables used to explain the relationships here are also different. What I want to draw your attention on is research and development personnel per 1,000 inhabitants. This is the attempt to consider the ecosystem, the density of human capital dedicated to research and development, which is not a positive factor, actually, it's as a negative influence, again, showing that evidently the ecosystem is not enough adequate to provide support. Another issue that I also want to emphasize is this negative factor, which is still significant by the knowledge-intensive firms' birth rate. In other words, although you have new firms, new startups, the mere fact that you have new ventures, these new ventures do not necessarily contribute to consolidating the ecosystem, and therefore they do not contribute to scaling up existing firms, which also suggests that probably the creation of new firms may be dependent on policy incentives. Indeed, this is something that has happened, and I can tell you, for example, the recent regional innovation system, the RIS 2025, accounts for this dynamic, upsurge of new startups, but you cannot definitely predict their survival, and that could be just a policy effect that very much dependent on the incentives, the monetary transfer that they receive, some sort of seed money that may incentivize especially students or graduates to still create new venture. Still, it's something that we need to consider. So just to wrap up, the key findings, universities, are there, they provide the infrastructure, they collaborate mostly with high-tech sectors, but what about the more traditional sectors, fashion, agriculture, the mechanics, for example, that I couldn't have time to explain. These sectors are the backbone of our economy, and they also show very interesting export rates over the past decade. So that means they have a comparative advantage. They have increasingly specialized, so they have acquired or they have generated, let's say, sophisticated knowledge that is probably incorporated in products, in processes that, or in services that sell abroad. And so it's not just sectors that you can set aside, marginal sectors, but you need to modernize them and innovate to maintain their global competitiveness. Also, I wanted to raise this issue of the role of researchers and this interaction, which is still not adequate in terms of what university provide to firms. But it's so important for firms, but still, their low level of investment is not enough to sustain the development of the ecosystem. And even though startups, fail and die, this is to some extent physiological. You have this death valley that has been observed in other contexts, mainly in the Silicon Valley. Here in Italy, it's not the Silicon Valley though. And you have a system of good SMEs that should be strengthened. And the fact that startups die, I don't read it as necessarily as a physiological factor. One last issue. One last issue is the fact that I've estimated innovation as the way ISTAT reports firms innovating their products and processes. But indeed, we have problem in measuring innovation, especially in these regions, because SMEs don't have much or this attitude to collaborate with universities. They interact with other actors within the market, in the supply chain. And so both at the firm level and at the ecosystem level, we may miss, what interaction, what innovation is. Also because in these models, we do not account for the positive externalities that may get generated when firms, even a small number of firms, invest in research and innovation. The very last thing, the patent, again, in the South is not a good proxy to, that's why I use it on the other side, not as a dependent variable. In a recent study I'm doing on an evaluation of the National Operational Program for Research and Innovation, we have found out that firms and universities kind of fight on who can register, who can apply for patents. So it's not necessarily a good proxy that, it may show other attitudes by firms, like positioning or even marketing, but this is quite new, known in the literature. So very good, very important role by universities in the infrastructure, but they're still disconnected from firms and their needs. Also, firms are not up to the role that they should play as partners, because they may not be strong enough, to understand their needs and to receive and absorb the external knowledge. So what we need, probably translating knowledge, scientific knowledge, so that we can bridge research with that productive knowledge the firms use in their processes to modernize themselves. We need also intermediary institutions, incubators, I'm not sure, accelerators, I'm not sure either. But this figures spanning different fields, academia, businesses, even institutions, may be needed. And we also need metrics that not only quantitatively capture, as I said, innovation, but also the learning, the collaboration, the type of relationships that can be generated between universities and companies. That's it. Thank you so much.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Mita. So questions to Mita? Who would like to break the ice? Yes, you can go there. Alice.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'm
sorry.
Please. I actually had a small question, because you mentioned that you weren't a fan of the term knowledge and technology transfer.
Oh, yeah.
And so I would love to know, I completely understand why, and I would also like to know if there's an alternative term that you think we should use instead.
Usually you have knowledge circulation or knowledge spillovers that entail, at least these terms convey a relationship, a multidimensional relationship. I've seen technology transfer offices working, and they focus too much on the technology piece. In this context, you need technology a lot, but not only technology. And it's not just what the university thinks technology may be useful, but also the way companies and even territories demand in terms of territorial innovation or social innovation. So it's a more, let's say, two-way or multiple-way relationships, and therefore, if you just have this function in an office that is mostly populated by other experts or, let's say, faculties or researchers in the STEM fields, you risk missing the whole picture. Instead, you should really be much more open in terms of receiving and even observing, the type of needs and challenges that territories now face, and develop a more complex, not solution, because there's not going to be one single solution, but continuous relationships. That's why in my book, I do not focus that much on research and development, but on this entrepreneurial training and education, because it's a matter of educating, not only firms and companies and institutions, but also researchers themselves.
One question from me, Mita. How would you explain or develop a bit more on this dichotomy that on the one hand, what you have is investment in R&D in the public sector that is a force for innovation, but you find that researchers in the public sector do not contribute to that force?
I mean, researchers in the private sector contribute to the development of their own entrepreneurial capacity.
Yeah, but I was saying the public.
The public is because researchers are very much focused on their own creature. They are engaging to this narrative that I explain it very well. Like when universities are too much drawn into this excellence type of performative pressure, because you are indeed evaluated, assessed by the national evaluation agencies according to the number of publications, the number of patents, the number of funding, or the amount of funding that you receive for research. And you do not get so much recognition nor funding for this third mission or public engagement, or this capacity to listen to the territories and their needs. Even though now we are in the midst of this exercise, evaluative exercise, the national Italy's national evaluation agency for research and university now evaluates also the admission basically cases that we need to provide as universities to show down. It's a kind of the competition to show the best case in terms of public engagement, stakeholder engagements, capacity to listen to the needs of citizens, or even rely on citizens, so-called citizen science, to develop new research. This is, I guess, it's a positive and promising evolution or development, but I'm not sure it's gonna stay. Or at this point, it's a too competitive pressure across the university system, and it's not necessarily fulfilling because it puts too much competition among universities for a small amount of resources. Instead, it should be a way for universities to collaborate within the same region. For example, we have like 7 universities, and each one is a kind of a microcosm, whereas the region has so many challenges in terms of innovation, modernization of industries, even development of so-called left behind places. That kind of challenge will need more collaborative approach.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Madame.
you. Thank you.
So we move forward to the next Miguel Dols Fellow. In this case is Rush Harel. He's a PhD candidate at the University of Stavanger in Norway, and he's going to be talking about maximizing innovation, connectivity, and the returns on R&D investment. So 50 minutes, and the floor is yours. We have a pointer somewhere there.
It's on the.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Raj. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Stavanger and also one of the Miguel Dols Fellows, like most of us in the room. My topic is similar to what we just discussed, connectivity, but not between firms and universities within the same region. I'm looking at connectivity from a much larger European level study and seeing whether or not it has some effects on innovation and whether or not also conditions do a lot of things that we talked about, one of them being R&D investment within the regions of Europe. And this is very timely because we know that R&D within the regions of Europe, R&D, innovation within the regions of Europe is converging with each other. So the top innovators are still the top innovators, but the regions in the periphery who are not necessarily one of the best innovators are slowly starting to emerge as good innovators, and they're starting to converge. So this is a really timely topic. This is why I found it was very interesting. In my presentation, I'm going to walk you through the context, the theory, how I define connectivity. This is the most important part of the presentation, model and data, and 3 conclusions. So first of all, regional innovation in Europe is converging, and the reason that I can say it so confidently is because I take it from somewhere else. European Commission 2025, they have this really nice graph which shows regional innovation score for all the regions of Europe. And on the x-axis is regional innovation index 2000. On the y-axis is percent change from 2000 to 2002. And from this graph, we see that the regions that were the most innovative in 2000 has grown the least, and the ones that were doing only okay before has grown quite a lot. So this is the clear signal of convergence. they use Regional Innovation Scoreboard, use a lot of different indicators, which if I used all, I would grow old. So I just use patents for my own research. I use a lot of patents. This is sort of like a similar graph that I built for myself in my own research, only using patents. But the logic behind this is exactly the same. On x-axis, you have total patents per capita for a certain year. And on y-axis is the growth rate from next year to the next year. So this is the growth rate, and this is the baseline, which if we draw over the last 20 years in Europe, we see a clear signal, which is that in the first 10 years within the regions of Europe, we see divergence, like regions that were innovating the most were also growing the most, but the slope has decreased over the years, and in fact reversed in the second half of this century that we've lived so far. So it went from a strong divergence to moderate divergence to convergence to now a relatively strong convergence. And this brings to the most central puzzle of my research, which is we know that innovation tends to concentrate on big urban hotspots, big regions of Europe. And this is particularly true for more complex technologies, more knowledge-intensive technologies. Most of them are in urban regions. But then what is the mechanism that is allowed for other regions that are not dense hotspots to also innovate and converge? Right? This is, I mean, we should be very happy that it's converging, but we as social scientists are a little bit obnoxious. We don't let it be. We need to research on why that's happening. So probably the two theories that we know. One is that it's probably because R&D itself, the investment in research and development itself, is also converging all over Europe. And there's this fantastic research by my supervisor in Norway, Rune Dalfjær, who is showing that both public and private R&D, but specifically private R&D, is showing strong convergence over the years in Europe, over the last 20 years. But then the other theory that I'm considering is also, could it be connectivity? Could it be that regions that were not in the forefront of development or innovation are now starting to connect themselves with this forefront of innovation regions and also starting to innovate themselves? So these two theories we're trying to investigate one by one first, a little bit of theory, and then we'll get back to the method section. First, let's start with convergence in R&D. Yes, there is convergence in R&D, and there is a paper showing that. And it's also a plausible explanation, because from the endogenous growth theory, R&D is the catalyst of technological change, and without it, regions can't innovate. And also, it's not just only for research and innovation, but it's also for regions to be able to get knowledge from elsewhere into the region. So the absorptive capacity of the region. So the more you invest inside, the more you'll be able to bring knowledge from outside and use it and make something out of it. So there are several theories that can tell us, okay, R&D might be a good reason why regions are converging. But the problem with attributing this convergence solely to R&D is not super satisfying, because we also know that the return of investment of R&D is also quite unequal. In the dense agglomerations, the ROI of R&D is also quite strong. So in the periphery, even if you invest a lot of R&D, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can convert it into innovation or patents quite at the same rate as the denser regions do. That's problem number one. But then there's also empirical evidence showing that despite cohesion policy, there has been convergence, but the convergence is not led by R&D. There's a fantastic paper which talks about, in this case, economic convergence, not innovation convergence, but it's saying that R&D is not the reason. So regions that invest in R&D grow no significantly different than regions that don't. In the case of peripheral regions, we're talking strictly about peripheral regions. So it's a little bit not fully satisfying for us to attribute all of this convergence to R&D. Does this mean that R&D investment in low innovation regions does not matter? No, I'm not saying that. And maybe one of the problems, and this is the conceptual part of the slide, and this is only one slide where I talk about conceptual contribution of my paper, which is maybe much of the literature has looked at core and periphery in quite static way, in quite a binary way based on geography, how central European are you, or how farther away from the capital you are based on geography, or levels of economic development, for example, GDP per capita. In case of cohesion policy, we see a lot of research showing these are convergence regions and these are the non-convergence regions, or the levels of innovation, which is patents per capita. And these are rather static classification, which promotes circular reasoning, in the sense that if you as a region don't innovate so much, you are a peripheral region. And the reason you're peripheral is because you don't innovate so much. So it's sort of like a circular reasoning, which has been going on in academia for quite some time. These two authors, they do quite a good job pointing them out. And therefore, they say that we need more of an exogenous and a network understanding of the periphery, which is not essentially, yes, you're peripheral, yes, you're core, without being able to switch between the boxes, but actually a network understanding of the periphery, where if you can do something about it, you could actually flip from being a peripheral region to a more core region. So that's what brings us to connectivity, which is where I can try to conceptualize connectivity as something like a networked understanding of regions of Europe. What is connectivity? Connectivity is essentially, I've already built a nice foundation around it, a region essentially trying to strategically build knowledge pipelines with other regions and saying, okay, I specialize in this thing. Maybe if I connect with that region or that firm or that university in this dense agglomeration, probably I'll benefit from it. And it doesn't have to be dense agglomeration. You could connect with anyone, anywhere, so long as it benefits for your innovative capacity. So this pipelines is basically connectivity for my reasons. For my research, and there's tons of evidence coming from Norway, Sweden, from Canada, which is not listed here, but Chile, England, some Asian lead firms, all of these regions have been able to plug themselves into the knowledge network, essentially by establishing knowledge pipelines and enhancing their connectivity. So connectivity as such has been studied as a relatively exogenous mechanism because it's not static and it's not fixed, helping less innovative regions remain innovative and embedded in the knowledge network. So if we think about collaborations between all the inventors as a network, peripheral regions also have the mechanisms to get inside the network and also quite lead the network. And has it actually been happening, or is this just something that I made up? Just to make sure that I'm not doing anything worthless, I tried to map all the inter-regional collaboration, co-inventorship of patents in Europe, and see if people are actually collaborating more now than they were used to. And this is 20 years, and over the last 20 years, we see quite a straight uptick. This is 150% increase of inventors within Europe collaborating with each other. This is inter-regional collaboration, so not within the same region, just inter-regional collaboration. There is a 150% uptick, which is quite significant. So based on this, my research question is quite straightforward. A, does inter-regional connectivity matter for regional innovation performance? Does it matter, first of all? And second, does it influence the returns of other indicators? In my research, it's R&D investment. So what do I mean by connectivity in conceptual terms? Like, how do I operationalize it? Well, what I do is it's calculated as the eigenvector centrality values of externally collaborating patent inventors based in European region. What I do is I take all the patents, look at its co-inventors, like if they're collaborating, I look at its co-inventors and where they're living. And then I make a network out of all the co-inventors of all the patents in Europe. And based on that network, I do this eigenvector centrality analysis, which will place all the inventors as, which will give the, for example, an importance mark, like how important are those inventors in the knowledge network. All the inventors will get all the individual inventors will get a score. And all of these inventors, then I regionalize them. So a region gets a score that is a sum of the importance of the inventor score for all of the regions. So that's how I operationalize it for every year. But we can also, if you have more questions, we can talk about it in the question and answer section. So by doing this, I create a knowledge network centrality indicator, which is the connectivity indicator for my research. And the map thereafter is something like this. And this is a little bit different than the usual European map that we're used to seeing, which is where Western European and Northern European regions are dark colors and the rest is light colors. We see actually that there's some dark colors in Southern Europe, a lot of dark colors in Eastern Europe as well, and a lot of dark colors in the periphery, not just Oslo and Stockholm and Malmö, but also dark colors in the other regions of Europe, which means essentially that the regions, for example, Stavanger, which is 150,000 people, it's not a dense agglomeration at all, and it's quite far from Brussels, quite far from Oslo, its capital. Despite of its peripheral nature in many other standards, it could still be quite central in the knowledge network, given its propensity to collaborate with other regions. So this map is quite different from what we're used to seeing. And this map is different also in numbers, we can see GDP per capita, the correlation is only 0.16, and with population, the correlation is only 0.21. And the most recent addition, I add the scatter plot as well, which is total patents on x-axis and knowledge network centrality on y-axis, to say that this is a rather exogenous indicator. We see that knowledge network centrality is high for obviously the ones that have quite high number of patents, but also less than median number of patents could also have really high knowledge network centrality just because they collaborate a lot. So you don't necessarily need to have a lot of patents to be quite central in this network. So that's a nice addition to the graph that I had not had until a few hours ago. So the model that I do to answer my first and my second question is this one. I model the growth in patents from this time period to the next time period as a function of total R&D of this time period, connectivity of this time period, baseline patent as a control for what my reason used to patent, and also a bunch of controls, which is GDP per capita, population density, share of people with tertiary education, and share of manufacturing employment for a certain reason. And the data comes from Eurostat and European Patent Office, EPO 2025 edition. And we use a 3 years moving window just to make sure that the data, because we're using futuristic data here and baseline data here, just to make sure that the time period does not overlap with each other. We're using 3 years moving window, and this is also quite particular in studies using patents, because patents can be spiky at sometimes and low at sometimes. So using a 3-year window also smooths the patent data quite a bit. So the results, first of all, as expected and supported by the convergence theory, we see there is a negative and significant relationship between baseline patents. So the regions that had high number of patents before are growing less, so it supports the convergence theory. Second, total R&D per capita is positive and significant and robust to the addition of controls, also based on endogenous theory, quite satisfies us. The most interesting part about this research is the connectivity indicator, which is the new indicator that we invent, is also positive and also significant and also robust to the addition of controls. So we now know that even controlling for the total per capita R&D investment within the region, even after controlling for the R&D, connectivity matters as an independent factor that promotes patenting growth in patenting. So this is how we establish the legitimacy of connectivity, and that answers my first question. The second question, does it also mediate the returns to R&D? I split the whole sample into 2 parts. One is above median connectivity, so highly connected regions, and low median connectivity, not so well connected regions. And now we immediately see that the return of investment on R&D is 003, 004, but only 001 in this. So obviously, the returns of investment exist in both worlds, but the returns are at least 3 to 4 times higher in the regions that are properly well connected. The third thing, which is very interesting, which was not one of the research questions, but I found out while doing the regressions, is that we see that convergence, the negative on baseline patents per capita, negative and significant results, is only valid in well-connected regions and not so much on not connected regions, which means that the convergence that we see in Europe is actually driven by regions that are more well-connected and not so much from the not connected regions, which is a completely unexpected but nice finding. 3 conclusions: A, connectivity matters; B, convergence is being led by well-connected regions; and C, connectivity thus enhances the returns on R&D investment. But these are really nice findings, but what we don't know yet is we often assume that, oh, it's connectivity, we don't need to invest in it so much, but actually connectivity, we don't know a lot about connectivity. Most of the research that we know about connectivity are case studies of individual reasons or individual firms. We don't know how a reason can boost connectivity, how much does it cost to boost connectivity, what is it at stake, so we don't know a lot about connectivity. So I think we need to do a significantly more research on connectivity. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Raj. So questions to Raj?
Yes.
Can I ask a little bit about this connectivity measure you use? I mean, can you say something about how connected are regions on average? I mean, like, how much do they cooperate across regions for this type of things?
I think the best answer that I have for that question is just on innovation level. So this is for patents. and this research is limited to just patents because, I mean, we don't have a better measure. But just on patents, we see that regions are collaborating quite a lot. And this is one evidence on that. And the second is this, where we don't see a lot of network centrality going up than zero, but knowledge network centrality in itself, the eigenvector centrality measure itself is a measure that is bound between 0 and 1. So it takes quite a lot to jump just even a little bit. So, but then still, we see that even low patenting regions are quite high. That top over there is Sweden, Stockholm, I know that for that. So it doesn't have more than medium patent outcomes, but it has really, really high connections. So
They are not standardized by population here.
sorry,
Are they not standardized by population?
here they're not. No,
It probably needs to be standardized by population
I could do that. It's yeah.
or by researchers, patent per million inhabitants.
Yeah, I can, but the logic behind this was just to see if centrality is just a function of sheer number of patents. When I do it by per capita, everything gets dragged down. So I mean, but I just wanted to see, is it patents that's actually contributing to centrality as well? And the answer is no.
Can I also use the follow-up question?
Yes, of course.
So the connections, have you investigated like if there are like if the connections that you have with like the international connections are more important than the national, or I mean, have you looked into
Yes.
the type of connectivity?
That would be an excellent question. There are three ways to do I think this analysis, and this was a great question in the conference as well. One is we could look at just connections. Doesn't have to be interregional. Just is connectivity good? Second is looking at interregional connectivity, which is where I do, and the third is looking at international connections, which is something one could do. I think to strike the balance between these two, I use this one. I don't use this one, the first one, because connections, which is not interregional, could be just agglomeration outcomes, right? So it could be just collaborating with someone just because they're in the same proximity that might not necessarily make sense to collaborate, but they're collaborating just because they are close. But looking at international would also have a trade-off that we would lose a lot of data points for first, but also it is possible. I mean, we could do it. For this research, I didn't do it, but I think it is possible, and it's definitely one of the things that could be a follow-up research, yes.
Thank you.
Santiago was yes.
I have a bunch of questions because I also work in networks. So like, yeah, but I will.
We cannot do a bunch of
Absolutely,
questions.
absolutely. I'll give it simple. And I think my main question is about how you deal with the nested structure of the regions here, because here you're basically ignoring that same regions are subject to the national level policies. Like there might be something confounding at the national level that you're not looking, because regions are nested within countries. I would expect that's something also.
Yes. No, but you can ask other questions as well. I was just looking.
You have fixed effects, like you're looking at the country level.
This has country level fixed effects, yes. This is country level fixed effects and standard errors clustered at the country level.
Not regional fixed effects.
No, not regional fixed effects. That is, we're thinking about it, and this was a discussion before. Do we use region fixed effects or country fixed effects? And the reason we stick to country fixed effect is to allow comparison between regions that are different indicators. So using region fixed effect would be fantastic, and we would go a little bit towards causal, but we don't really, because both patents and connectivity don't fluctuate so much over time. We don't want to say, okay, increasing this much by connectivity increases this much by patents. So we wanted to see how regions compare within the national innovation system, how we can compare with
Innovation systems are national.
Yes, innovation systems are largely national as well.
And can you go back to the graph with when you use the network measure on the total patents? It will be interesting to see this graph for the change, for the actual outcome you use, for the change of growth.
Yes.
Because my first reading of this, because you're building the centrality measure from the network, that you might be just introducing like mechanical correlation here. Because you're building this from the network of patents. Like your centrality measure comes from the network of patents.
Yes, but great question again. Yes, we tried so much to disentangle them. So we did a bunch of things. First, we go towards a network of inventors and not patents to basically isolate the correlation between number of patents and the network indicator. So this reflects not the patent network, but the inventor network. So that's one step that we do, and that reduces the correlation a little bit. Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. Really.
Okay.
But yes, this was a great concern when I was thinking about this. Yeah.
I have like two questions, correlated to some extent. You go to the inventors network,
Yes.
but that reflects some previous collaborations, probably like you have a tradition of collaboration, for example, universities or research groups that have been around for a certain period of time. I mean, it's not just like mushroom, the collaboration of inventors, it builds over time. I mean, have you seen, this temporal effect or temporal factor, in building this network? And subsequently, if you were to address connectivity as policy goal, what would be, how would you incentivize, and how would you, promote and foster this connectivity?
Yes.
At the university level or at the individual level? I mean, what kind of incentive?
That's what I was talking about towards the end of my presentation. We don't know so much about connectivity, and I try to find interregional connectivity in literature, and there's so little. It's only from level or our case studies. But I think the policies from Horizon Europe, for example, where they have to have different regions, otherwise the proposal wouldn't be accepted, I think is a great initiative. So something like that would be great. To answer your first question, yes, there could be historical buildup of.
Even the Horizon 2020, like coalitions or.
Yes. In this research, we used fixed effect OLS. So we were only looking at collaborations that happened within the time frame. And we compare this time frame with other time frame because it's fixed effects OLS. So basically historical patents will be less.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. So thank you very much, Ron.
Fellow in this case is Dr. Jonna Richardson, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Jönköping University. And she's going to be talking about local economic shocks and positive shifts in rural and declining areas, impacts on labor markets, migration, and political outcomes. Jonna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Here, let's see if I can use this one. No.
Control L or Control
L,
Yeah,
yes,
that's-
Yes, and now you can use it. Yeah. Yes, press the. Yeah, now it's working.
Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. For you who don't know me, I'm Jonna Richardson. I'm a postdoc at Jönköping University, as Andrea said. I plan to talk a little bit about my overall research agenda, but I realized that I have a little bit of limited time, so I'm gonna talk about my paper that I'm writing together with Gabriel Rodriguez-Puello. It's a colleague of mine at Jönköping. It's called The Fusion of Economic Shocks in the Labour Market. It's evident from a mining boom in Sweden. So this paper is currently under review in Journal of Labour Economics after a first round of revise and resubmit, but all comments are still very, very appreciated. But before I turn to this paper, I kind of would just like to put it in some perspectives. I would like to just kind of briefly situate it within my current broader research agenda. So most of my current research is focusing on what happens in rural and peripheral regions when they experience a local economic shock or a positive shift in their development trajectory. So, I mean, in Sweden, much like in many, many other countries, we have rural and peripheral regions that have seen long decades of population decline, deteriorating public services, weak labor markets, an aging population, and a growing support for far-right political parties, anti-establishment parties, and so on. And this is more or less the literature on regional inequality and left behind and lagging places, right? So now in my current research, I
instead of focusing on decline, I focus on what happens in these regions when they experience improvements. And this has been happening quite extensively recently in Sweden, both due to the resource booms, but also because of major industrial investments, large new establishments, many of these linked to the green transition. And a lot of policymakers now, both at the national and the EU level, they see these changes as central to kind of securing critical minerals and also advancing this green transition, right? So I think it's very important to look into how these changes affect regions and the individuals living there, since this can have important implications for economic stability and social cohesion. So in my current research, I look at labor markets, how labor markets are affected by such shocks, and this is this paper more or less, and another paper that I'm working on, but I'm also looking at migration responses, both out-migration, in-migration, and changes in demographic profiles due to these economic changes. And I also look at political consequences due to these changes and immigrant integration. But now over to this paper. So let's see if it works. Now it works. So in this paper, we study the effects of a local economic shock, the 2004 mining boom in Sweden, and we look how this shock affected individual labor market outcomes, more specifically earnings and employment. And we look how these are affected across different spatial and temporal contexts, sectors, and individual characteristics. And more specifically, first, we look at the spatial diffusion of the effects of the shock. So we look at how the boom's effects propagate across geography with residential distance to the nearest mine. And secondly, we look at who is affected by this shock. So we look at different demographic groups and different sectors and how the boom's effects vary across these groups. We also look at sectoral transition. And finally, we look at residents and migrants separately. So we distinguish between pre-boom residents and migrants or individuals who migrate to these areas after the boom to see if the effects on these groups' earnings and employment varies. So the mining boom in Sweden. So the mining boom started in 2004. Then it was this like really sharp price increase happened. So international prices of minerals rose sharply with the beginning of 2004 and continued to rise up until 2011. So this is iron ore prices here in the figure, and you can see the price and then the production. And then after 2011, the prices collapsed until 2015, after which the prices stabilized. And this change in prices, it is kind of viewed as an exogenous change, an exogenous shock to these areas, because it was driven by the increased demand for these minerals, and especially China's increased demand for these minerals, but also, but it was also driven by speculations in the stock markets. However, it was not affected by supply shifts, so that was not the driver here. In Sweden, the mining sector is very concentrated in the northern part of the country. And these northern parts, or less the whole northern part of Sweden, is very sparsely populated area. It has seen like decades of disinvestment, depopulation, and so on. And we are now focusing on the 3 mines that are producing iron ore. These are the largest mines. These stand for most of the overall mining employment in the country, and they also contribute very significantly to Swedish GDP. So the data that we're using is geocoded microdata from Statistics Sweden. We're looking at the period 2000 to 2015. This data is employer-employee linked. So this means that we can track individuals. We know in which sector they work, how much they earn, if they're employed or not, and we know their demographic characteristics, age, gender, etc., and education and so on. And we also know their location, their grid level location. And this data then covers the whole Swedish population, but we restrict the sample to working age individuals, so individuals between 18 and 65 years, and individuals that appear at least 5 years in our sample and live within 150 kilometers of one of these mines for at least 1 year during our study period. And this gives us around 35,000 residents, or above 560,000 residents times years observations, and around 8,000 migrants and 135,000 migrants times year observations. So how do we measure exposure to the shock? So, I mean, we measure the exposure by looking at the residential distance from the mine, right? So, and then we use this ring method. It's kind of commonly used in the literature. So you categorize like a treatment ring and then a control ring, but instead of using or adhering to these like ad hoc cutoffs that can be biased, we use a non-parametric estimator to help us define our treatment rings. And this is following Bach's 2023 suggestion. So applying this method to our data gives us like a first view of the spatial propagation of the shock. So we see that, I mean, these are just average changes pre and post the shock in earnings. And we see that the average changes in earnings very close to the mines are larger, and then they kind of propagate a little bit, and then here they are kind of average. And here we have an urban area, which explains a little bit the up there, the peak there. So, I mean, even though we get like a first idea of spatial propagation here, these are average levels, so we don't see the like diffusion over time, or we can't use this method either to kind of compare different groups or so. So we use it to define our treatment rings. And here are a map on our treatment rings, or actually this only depicts the rings 4 to 7, because rings 1 to 3 are relatively small. But you can see that, I mean, these are ring 4, 5, 6, 7, and then this ring 7 here is our control group then. Yeah. And then our empirical strategy. So we use two sources of variation. We use the temporal variation, so the time variation, I mean, before the shock, and then the shock, and then after the shock. And then we use the spatial variation, so the distance, again, the rings. And then we estimate this dynamic difference in difference specification. So we have individual Y, I, so the outcome Y is earnings or employment, right? For individual I in grid J, time T. And then we include individual grid and time fixed effects. And here we have the ring, so the treatment intensity. And then when we run the specification, we can use the pre-shock coefficients as a test for parallel trends, and then see how the effects kind of propagate over time. And these are our like main results. So these are our earning results, and we can see really clearly here in the figure that ring 1 to 4, individuals living in ring 1 to 4 see a relatively large gain in earnings quite directly after the shock, right? And actually, even though we have a price collapse in 2011, the earnings does not decrease again. So everything here is relative to ring 7. So ring 1 to 4, so up to
7 kilometers from a mine, individuals see these earning effects. And then we can see that individuals that are employed in the mining sector obviously gain a lot. The direct effects into the mining sector here are significant, but we can also see that individuals employed in other sectors see earnings gains. And this is especially the case in the service sector, the manufacturing sector, and the construction sector. We see no or little gains in the other sectors. We can also see that we have some, time lag here, so it takes a little bit longer before individuals in other sectors see any earnings effects. When it comes to employment, we don't see that much results on overall employment. However, employment in the mining sector increases significantly. And then we also have some heterogeneity. We can, for example, see that men gain a lot more than women. Obviously, because men are more likely to be employed in the mining sector, but also in the construction and manufacturing sectors. But we also see gains for women, right? We can see that, well, the earning effects, we see earning effects for all educational levels. Even though the mining sector in Sweden is relatively capital intensive and employs a lot of individuals that have higher education, it also employs a lot of individuals with lower education. So we actually see these earnings effects across education levels. We can also see that so this is, unfortunately, I didn't have room to put all the rings in here, and it's still a lot of information in this table, but we are also looking at like sectoral transitions. So we are examining individuals in these sectors in 2003 and then see where they end up after the shock. So we are looking at their first transition, or if they stay in the same sector throughout the study period, then they are in the same sector. And we're doing this for all rings, but here I only have ring 1 and ring 7, so the control ring, right? So here are those that live closest to the mine and those that live farther away. So we can see that the retention in mining is very, very high closest to the mine. 80% of those employed in mining in 2003 are still employed in mining in 2015 and has been employed in mining throughout the full period. We can see that manufacturing has especially low retention, especially close to the mines. And then we can also see that manufacturing is contracting, and so are a few other sectors. We can see that in ring 7, which kind of strengthens our case here that it's a good control group. Apparently, like 0 individuals were employed in the mining sector in 2003, but in 2015, 9 are employed, so it's not a huge amount, but we see some commuting there. Back. And then we can also say something perhaps about the migrants. So we see that migrants also benefit from both the move and the mining boom here. So they see earnings gains. We can also see that they benefit, especially if they go directly into the mining sector. And I think this is a little bit interesting because this is what I'm working on now in another paper more explicitly. We can also see that most of the migrants actually come from areas quite close, right? We do a lot of robustness checks, but I'm not going to go into this.
So in interest of time, I'm gonna conclude that, so in this study, we look at the effects of a local resource shock, and we observe significant improvements that last over time, although prices collapse, which probably says something about Sweden's like welfare system with like collective agreements and so on. But yeah, the improvements persist over time. They spread across geography to 27 kilometers the first years, and then even to 83 kilometers from the mines. And they also spread a little bit across economic sectors, with construction, manufacturing, and services benefiting, but not like public services and others. But we also observe significant heterogeneity in effects, which means that we have an increase in earnings gap between certain groups in the area due to this mining boom. Thank you.
Right, questions here. Who wants to ask first question? Yes.
So very, very nice study, very nice design. I have a question about like your main result where you have like the different rings.
Yes.
About like this gap, which is consistent in like most of the rings, like we have like rings 1, 2, 3, 4, like behaving almost the same, but then you have a big gap. Like, why do you think that's the case?
I think it's like a result of the method that we're using. So, I mean, we're using this non-parametric method here to define the rings, right? That means that the first 4 rings, or 3 rings especially, are very small. Because they see as, this method also kind of groups a similar number of individuals in each ring. So because of that, these rings become very small, and I think that's why we see these results later on. So I mean, we could probably, we want to use this non-parametric method because we don't want these ad hoc treatment rings, but we could probably, and we do in our kind of appendix and robustness checks, treat these 4 rings as 1 ring, more or less.
I have something to that. It's like, because what I find interesting about this is then that in terms of like the general equilibrium issue, like a labor market shock that's increasing salaries and increasing migration towards that, like this size and closer to the mines, I guess, are not affecting negatively other labor markets, like nearby labor markets, which I would imagine would be like an expected effect. Like people moving closer to the mine, like I would expect a negative effect on earnings or like other labor market outcomes in those regions that are being affected because people are just moving out. But you don't see that.
No,
So you feel like
we don't
it's
see.
just a persistent positive effect.
Yeah. No, we don't see negative spillover effects in that sense. I mean, we see some crowding out effects in some sectors, right? That some sectors lose employees, but we don't see negative earning effects or anything like that.
In migrants as well,
Yeah. Hello, sorry.
migrants as well.
Yeah.
Come to work.
Okay, my question this side. One comment. You see that there has been an increase in prices, and that has an impact on salaries, etc. So that's perfect. But then the prices collapse and the salaries remain high. Yes. How long do the salaries remain high? Because apparently for you, they remain for the whole of your period, but can they remain high forever?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, we would like to examine a longer time span, but we cut it in 2015 because then we also realized that a lot of migrants coming into the area were refugees and came not to work in the mines, but as refugees. And then, I mean, the analysis on migrants weren't that keen cut. But no, we would definitely like to extend the period. But also, I think, even though they remain high, in Sweden, salaries don't decrease. They can't really because of the collective agreements, right? So I think this is like a Swedish specific in that sense. I think what can happen is that a lot of people lose their jobs instead when we have a significant bust. Unfortunately, I mean, we don't have that significant of a bust, even though we have this price collapse. We can see here that, I mean, we have a price collapse, but production actually increases still. So I think that also explains it a little bit. But no, it would be super interesting to investigate this more long term.
Just one piece of advice, go back to one of your graphs on your diff graphs.
Okay.
Yeah. I would recommend that in order to facilitate the reading visually, that you have a color code. So instead of having different forms, you have a green, then orange, blue. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
Logically. So you might want to start with, if you want blues or reds, it doesn't matter. Deeper red for ring one, and it becomes red and then orange and yellow. Or because then it's intuitively clear what's, so the closer you are to the mine, the higher the salary increase, and you will see it immediately. Here, you have to really look into it to know what's going on.
Like up and down, yeah, you're right, thank you, that's.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we move to the fourth Miguel Dols Fellow, and this is Roshan Lee, who's a PhD candidate at King's College London. And now we move from salaries and innovation into the financialization of climate governance, carbon markets, shareholding state, and the politics of offsetting. So, Roshan, you have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Right, great. So let me shape, the geographical area from Europe to East Asia. So this is actually my PhD thesis, and it's absolutely work in progress because I'm currently still, dealing with different data and code, different sort of interviews. So for today, with this 10 to 15 minutes presentation, I'll just give you a broad concept and also theoretical framework on what this piece is about, and also, the case study and everything. Right. So all of the thing actually starts, not only starts from carbon markets, not only start from the development of carbon market, but actually I think my initial thinking is starting from, companies dealing with carbon offsetting programs. So, these things are quite popular. However, you can see really a lot of scandals and also a lot of misconduct around companies dealing with different offsetting programs. And also, people just been discussing about, so is carbon offsetting really works or not? So I'm thinking, right, so how about I link carbon offsetting and also financialization together and to see, is this market-based mechanism really works or not? Right, so in order to understand what does it mean by carbon offsets and also why companies dealing with that, we have to look at, something slightly bigger, so like a bigger picture, so is the state-led carbon market. So actually, we are aware of the EU ETS. So it's been developed for quite a long time. So that's like liberal market model. On the other hand, we actually have lots of emerging economies. So they also have state direct led markets such as India and Brazil, Mexico. So for those emerging markets, they also, have this kind of ideas of how about we develop a, carbon market mechanisms to do some carbon trading and etc. So I feel like at the center of my case, obviously, so China. So actually, the whole thesis about this single country study on China's mode. The thing about the China's carbon market, so we sort of had this concept for quite decades, so like more than 2 decades. So talk about how about we dealing with carbon trading, dealing with different carbon credit, and build this sort of market-based mechanism in order to mitigate the climate change and also the climate transitions. So this concept emerged to a actual building the carbon market. So initially there are like different sort of local carbon markets trading, very, very small trading. And then in 2021, the big national carbon markets has been formally formed. So, however, the thing about China's carbon market is actually is very much state-led, and also it involves in not only private sectors but also like largely the state-owned enterprises. So, in order to understand China's carbon market, and also to understand, what's the relationship between private sector and also public sector. So I present to you this framework, which I personally call the carbon statecraft. So it involves in 3 different concepts, and I would then give you like more explanation on what's the different connections between those 3 different terms. So first of all, the shareholding states. So this concept was first introduced in 2015 or so in a journal Socioeconomic Review. So basically, this concept is talking about, so the state is not only a regulator, so they're not only give policies and also regulations. However, it also acts as an owner into different state-owned enterprises. So to have some shares and dividends, that sort of thing. So first, the shareholding states. So act both as a regulator and also an owner. So the second concept is like administrative assertion. So you've got a big central state to manage everything, and on doing that, they also create a lot of financial carbon-related assets and all of that. And finally, we create different carbon products and also financial assets to integrate all of them into a broader strategy. So you've got industrial upgrading, you've got anything relates to technological sovereignty, and finally geopolitical standing. However, on the geopolitical side, that's actually not at the center of my thesis. So right now, actually a lot of discussion around Belt and Road Initiative, and also its relationship to the hosting country's environmental governance. So a lot of discussion around that. However, my thesis is like mainly within China, and also how do we deal with the carbon statecraft. So on this concept itself, actually, I partially adapt the term climate statecraft. So basically, how the entire state they deal with climate change mitigation, adaptation, and everything. So in my case, I just directly focus more specifically on the carbon market, carbon trading, and also offsetting. So this is my term. So following on that, my framework is basically the pyramid of carbon statecraft. So you might think about, okay, so this is basically from up to bottom, this approach. So you've got the ruler, basically the central state, or I call it the shareholding states, to design the whole system. And we've got different departments to design the system, to design the whole national carbon market. And after that, you've got a player which are the state-owned enterprises. And I gotta say, so until now, they are still like the biggest player within the national carbon market system. So how they navigate the entire system. So how they upgrade and operating everything, and also trade different carbon credits within the system. So that's also part of my thesis that I'm going to talk about. And finally, I'm not only discussing about like broader macro level. However, I really want to focus on like something like more detailed. So not only like the central state, but also how do local governments react to different carbon trading policies, different offsetting mechanisms, and all of that. So the final part would also be linked with local government. So you can see I developed this pyramid of carbon statecraft. So this is my framework, and therefore I've got 3 different paths to correspond with this framework. So first of all, I'm currently working a lot on the carbon market thing, so China's carbon market, and also potentially to have like a comparison between China and EU ETS. So that's the first thing on state level. And secondly, on the company level, on the corporation level, so mainly dealing with state-owned enterprises and how they how they operating this offsetting thing, and also does it really works? Does it work or not? So something like that. And finally, on local government. Yeah, so talking about all of those, my central research question is, how does financialization facilitate carbon offsetting in the context of Chinese shareholding state? So you can see a few keywords. So financialization, so this whole thing, carbon market, carbon offsetting, really heavily market-based mechanisms. So how does it relate to finance, and also how do we define or like reconsider the financialization within the climate governance in general, and in the context of China's shareholding state. So on the method, mixed method, so I'm using that. So including some case studies. So on the case studies, I'm dealing with 2 parts. So obviously I'm going to look at carbon offsetting and also carbon markets. And on the other hand, I'm looking at like several company sectors. So those sectors that's heavily involved in the carbon trading. So such as power sectors, power generation sectors, steel, and also manufacturing, those different sectors, and mainly to look at case studies of SOEs, so state-owned enterprises. And next thing, I just conduct several interviews, so like roughly about 15 to 20 different interviews, mainly with company managers. So they work within the state-owned enterprises, and also they're dealing with different carbon trading cases. So I also conducted interviews and currently dealing with all of those data. And finally, some conference observations. So I did go to like 1 to 2 different conferences. They're working on carbon capture and also utilize and carbon storage, those very, very technical sort of thing. So I went to those conferences, so that would also be part of my data. So roughly three areas of contribution. So this thesis is talk about states in a broad term, and also I really want to talk about the local government, and finally talk about climate governance. So I would say the main literature that I'm currently dealing with, those literatures around state capitalism, around green state, around environmental state. So how those different terms could, have some kind of relationship to China's development of carbon market. So hopefully could contribute to that part of literature. And secondly, to bring a financialization perspective. So, obviously, so if you look at the current literature, there are like several papers directly talk about financialization and also carbon market. But I'm thinking about using this single country case study to bring like more nuanced perspective on that. And finally, So between the state, central state, and also the local government. So what I mean local government is not every single province. It also linked to the case study. So I'm using case study to design, like to choose like several detailed and typical province to do this local government case study. And to show a time space different trajectory and link to the economic geography area. So that's basically like what I designed. So like what's my research and also what's the broad conceptual framework of my thesis, and also roughly my contributions. So moving on to that. So I'm talking about carbon offsetting. So in the Chinese context, so what exactly is offsetting? So I'm introducing you this CCER program. So basically certified emission reduction. So this thing has been paused for some time. However, it's been relaunched in October 2023. And you can see that's like a short introduction. So what's the process of certified, different project, and also, which areas that they do this sort of program. However, you could see, so it's one of the offsetting, mechanisms, and I would say so. In this country, it's like the main offsetting programs, and it's quite official. So that's why, one of the reasons why I use that specifically as one of the case studies. So currently on this CCER program, I'm still working on that, but just give you a sense of, what does it mean as carbon offsetting to basically certify those programs in different industries, and what's the process. Yeah, so this is another sort of introduction on the carbon offsetting programs. So currently, I gotta say, not much trading data around CCER. However, I'm still like working on more data to see how many stakeholders are involved in that, how many companies are involved in it. So I mean, like a lot of personal investors, they want to invest in this sort of area. But in the end, as I said before, it's largely involved in, state-owned enterprises. So like they got the opportunity, and also they've got a large amount of carbon trading to do, and also they did it. But like the next question is like, so they've got this offsetting mechanism, they've got different projects. Does it also link to the real climate change mitigation? Does it really?
You have consumed your time. Have you realized that?
Oh,
So
sorry.
you have to wrap up.
Okay, right. So wrap up. Right. So I would only say again, so this is a very broad introduction to my thesis. So I give you the conceptual introduction, the framework as you seen previously in my slides. So basically dealing with these single country case studies and dealing with 3 different layers. So I'm currently doing like one of the papers, working paper on carbon markets, but obviously dealing with other parts of the thing, such as carbon offsetting and also local government. So I would say yes, and some final notes. So you might think of, okay, so you talk about state-owned enterprises, so how about like other non-SOEs? So I'll say, so currently, because they are like the largest players within the system, so I would say, so given the data availability, so that will be like my main research participants so far. And yes, I think that'll be it. So very short introduction on my whole project. So welcome all of the critics or like suggestions, everything. Thank you.
Okay. Comments, questions? Yes, Martha.
I found the triangle very interesting, but it feels like it's a very clean top-down approach to policy and practice, but You said that you also conducted interviews that were interested in local government. So I'm sure that there must be some conflict of interest or some sort of fracture somewhere. So I would be very interested in knowing more about your specific case studies.
Yeah, so the case studies, so I actually did the interview primarily on the company level, so it's not on the state level. So and also on the interview content, I gotta say, so primarily there are like company managers, they're dealing with those different offsetting programs. They are very technical. So a lot of different content relates to, you know, different technologies in relations to climate change mitigations and all of that. So there are definitely limitations on interviews. But like that's only part of my thesis, and also I'm linking more case studies, like linking more data to sort of have more explanations to dealing with different interview data. So yeah, but that's only part of my thesis and only dealing with part of this framework.
Okay, my question would be a broader question. What is it that you aim to contribute with your dissertation? What is your contribution to society in general?
Right, so I think, so first thing, definitely, I really want to contribute to tell the broader audience, I mean, like not only within this country, but also like broadly. So what does it mean, or like how do we understand the development of carbon markets within an authoritarian regime? So I want people to know more about what does it mean by carbon market and also carbon offsetting. And secondly, the contribution is, so given, you know, let's just go back to my initial idea. So does carbon offsetting works or not? So I want to, you know, after finishing this thesis, to sort of answer this question a bit. And finally, my contribution is just to the broad climate governance. So what does it mean by a financialization of climate governance, and what's the really relationship academically between financialization and also climate governance? However, I gotta say, so my research question, you know, dealing with financialization and also other climate questions, I'm not saying, okay, here we've got a country and it already developed its own carbon markets. It's already been financialized or not. I'm actually dealing not dealing with this yes or no question, but also I just want to know what's the mechanisms between this concept and also broadly speaking climate governance.
Thank you very much. Russell? We moved from one PhD candidate at King's College London to another, who's also Miguel Dols Fellow. So Santiago Quintero Suarez is going to be talking about the bureaucratic politics of environmental decentralization outcomes. So the floor is yours. And you have 15 minutes.
Yes,
to answer.
Yes. Good. So I'll type myself here. Good. Thank you very much for having me, for being here. What I'm presenting today is one of the papers like I've been working on during my time here at LSE. It's about the bureaucratic politics of environmental decentralization. I will tell you about this in a second, what it means. I will start with this, and the initial motivation of the paper is about environmental decentralization. Why we care about environmental decentralization. And one of my concerns usually when I go to comparative politics conferences or climate politics conferences is that everyone talks about national level outcomes, national level politics, national level policies. Because when we see the wider framework of climate change, the way to tackle climate change, we think about how countries deal with this at the national level. So we talk about the national level contributions in the context of the Paris Agreement. But the point I want to talk about is that actually a lot of the things we care about when we talk about climate politics, environmental policy in particular, actually happens at the local level. So first of all, environmental policy is a local good. basically the quality of the environment you feel at the local level. Second of all, despite like many of the many important policies like carbon offsetting or carbon markets, regulation on carbon emissions happen at the national level, many policies happen at the local level as well, the subnational level. So either because they adopt like subnational level, subnational governments adopt the policies, or they're the ones implementing the policies, monitoring the national level policies. So we care what happens about what happens at the subnational level. And sometimes it is even the local governments who are in charge of providing clean water or controlling air quality. So many of the things we care, even if the main outcomes happen or we measure them at the national level or make some of the key policies happen at the national level, the subnational level matters. Like what happens at the subnational level matters. And that's why I'm looking at decentralization, basically meaning that central governments devolve decision-making power to subnational governments, either in terms of expenditure or political capacity, ability to make the decisions. And this happens under the promise that decentralization, this is a very widely promoted reform during the last 20, 30 years at least, saying that if we make the decisions at the local levels, so the policies might be very tailored to the local population, we can encourage participation, so democracy is improved as well. Accountability is also better because it happens if you're deciding at the local level, so you can hold your local politicians accountable. We get more information from the local populations as well. This is one of the main benefits usually argued in favor of decentralization. And overall, then, it means that if the fairness of the policy and the efficiency of the policy is better at the local level, so we should see better outcomes, better environmental outcomes. That will be the expectations, and that will be one of the main goals of decentralizing the environmental policy. However, the evidence is mixed. Many times what we see is that if there's a negative or no effect, we see local underinvestment, we see externalities because local governments can try to perhaps increase their demand for highly polluting industries because they're taxpayers. So they end up competing for these types of citizens or firms, and that might increase actually pollution. We see this race to the bottom behavior or a lot of increased regional variation. And this is very common not only for environmental decentralization, this is more like many other policy areas. So this is the main motivation, and what I want to understand of the main motivation of the paper is, when does it work? So we believe that decentralization might provide better outcomes. Why do we need? What are the political and institutional conditions for it to work? This is the main overarching question. And this is basically one of the key questions now in the decentralization literature, on the local governance literature. But specifically, I'm looking at something that I think has been overlooked, and that's the role of the professionalization or the politicization, better put in a negative way, of the bureaucracy. I mean, like how much politicians control local bureaucracies, or bureaucracies in general, the public service. And if you don't think this is important, this is a very random institution to think about, well, like, let's think about what's happening now and what happened a couple of years ago in the US with the environmental agencies, because the president has a lot of sway in terms of hiring and firing in the Environmental Protection Agency. So many of the policies that were implemented by Biden in this case have been completely stopped only by controlling the bureaucracy. This is one of the issues happening there in the US. Same happening in Brazil. Brazil has very powerful environmental agencies, but because Bolsonaro tried to basically overtake them, so there was a lot there are many reductions in terms of the actions. There was a big problem just because you have the politicians controlling what's happening at the bureaucratic level. So I think trying to isolate bureaucracies from the politicians' control might actually be important in terms of the environmental outcomes. And I'm trying to see how it plays a role for the outcomes of decentralization. And a bit of theory. Yes, so we can conceptualize decentralization or the challenges of decentralization in terms of the coordination problems it creates. So when you decentralize, basically you're fragmenting authority and jurisdictions. So you have now more people deciding about their own territories. It is more difficult to align their interests, align the implementation of the policies. So we can talk about vertical coordination. So it's more difficult to coordinate national level with the local level. So if we have national level policies, how do we get the local governments to implement the objectives of the national policy? if they are free basically to decide their own policies. And same across different jurisdictions. So basically we have jurisdictions now competing against each other, sometimes leading to this race to the bottom behavior. So these are the two main challenges. And we have like all these old theories of decentralization, basically saying this is the oldest approach to decentralization, saying if you have a public service that might create externalities, then don't decentralize. So if you have something where if a municipality consumes more of that good, it might be, let's say, clean air, but that will have spillovers over the neighboring municipalities, and don't decentralize because that's likely to happen. You're creating more spillovers if you fragment authority. The second generation theories talk more about the vertical issues, as basically the main problem usually is the local capture. So local politicians have incentives to basically use the new gain powers in their favor for political reasons, for political gain, instead of actually trying to improve the quality of the policy. So the focus is more on the political economy, let's say, of the division of authority. And this is like more recent approach to the issue is decentralization works when we have political centralization. So we can spread the ability to decide about how to make policy, but if we have a strong central parties, then we can create political incentives for local governments to actually work together. If they can work together towards a common goal, coordinated by the strong local, but the strong central parties. A couple of things I don't like about this, but let's say my proposal sits more on the second one, on the political economy of decentralization. Basically, what I argue is that an independent bureaucracy can provide means for coordination. Is that there are mechanisms that are created or institutions that are created by an independent bureaucracy that might improve or might limit the challenges of decentralization. Some of the key issues here is one of the main outcomes we see after these professionalization reforms, meaning trying to isolate the bureaucracy from politicians, is that it reduces corruption. So if there's less corruption, there's less ability for local politicians to capture decision-making. So then perhaps increasing the independence from the bureaucracy is helping also to reduce that problem of local capture. Long-term credible commitment, because we have a category of professionals that can decide based on professional criteria and technical criteria that might offer also their ground rules for coordination. And one last one is, of course, this also shields the policy, the public administration from political cycles. So that might also provide a long-term approach that might facilitate coordination. So this is basically the key hypothesis, is that increased bureaucratic professionalization, meaning reducing the power of politicians over the bureaucracy, might improve the outcomes, might moderate positively the outcomes of decentralization. So decentralization works if we have more professional bureaucracies. What I do is I look at a panel of 91 countries from 2005 to 2022, and I take as my main independent variables. These are my environmental outcomes, the environmental performance index indicators. Basically, each one of them looks at a different set of environmental goods. The overall performance indicator is basically an overall measure of all of them. The ecosystem's vitality looks at the more spread, let's say, the vitality of forests, water management at the larger scale. So these are more diffuse goods in terms of like they're more difficult to see improvements, but we think about things like biodiversity are here. Environmental health is more about the local environmental goods like clean air, drinking water. These are the things that you see basically local urban areas. And climate change is basically carbon emissions. So this is the overall indicator, then is an aggregate of the three of them. Using my main independent variables, I'm taking the expenditure decentralization from the International Monetary Fund. I'm looking at political decentralization as the independence of local governments from the national government in terms of like this is basically a democracy, subnational democracy measure. Policy decentralization, I take the policy for the environment database produced by the OECD. They have many of environmental policies, and they are coded by the level of the government who implements, who adopts the policy. So basically, I'm saying what's the share of all the all the environmental policies in the country that are adopted by the by the subnational governments. And I'm taking as a bureaucratic professionalization a measure proposed by the Varieties of Democracy project, which basically measures how much politicians control hiring and firing of the bureaucracy. So like higher levels here, higher values mean that is a more professionalized bureaucracy. So I have a bunch of controls. We can talk about them in the Q&A, if you will. Bureaucratic strategy, I'm using one of the things with decentralization studies is that these are pretty stable reforms, like decentralization doesn't change much. Same with bureaucracy, with bureaucratic reform, doesn't change much. So like the within effects of the standard fixed effects models kind of like lose a lot of the information. And what I want to see are also differences across countries, because these measures are kind of stable across time. So what I do is I use this Mundelac decomposition. Basically, I separate each of my regressions of interest into its mean. And that allows me to have like a constant for the, you can interpret it as the like long-term structural effects of the variable, and the within component, which is the year-to-year change. So as in a fixed effects model. And so I have a random effects at the country level, and then my main variables of interest decomposing to the within component, like the change year to year, and this structural component, that's the between component that allows me to compare country to country. So the results we have here are the main variables. I have the expenditure decentralization, policy decentralization, and political decentralization, and the bureaucratic decentralization. These are for the within effects. So this is the year to year. You can read this as a fixed effects regression, basically. This is the between effects. These are the structural effects, like the long-term effects on environmental outcomes. So each one of the colors is for one of the different environmental domains or environmental types of outcomes. What I see is like very common in the decentralization literature is that overall the within effect is negative. So if you increase your decentralization this year, next year, you will see a negative effect on environmental outcomes. So you're creating these coordination challenges. So this is one of the common findings in the literature. And when I include the between effects, so this is the comparison across more structural levels, actually, in the long run, decentralization is better. Like countries tend to be who are decentralized on average, that are more decentralized on average, have better results at the on environmental outcomes. So I will skip. I see something similar for the bureaucratic professionalization. So year-to-year changes don't have an important effect, but overall, more professionalized bureaucracies, countries tend to have better results. So the key part is the moderator part. Like when I interact, so I have a bunch of interactions. When I see the effects, the moderating effect of bureaucratic professionalization, and what I find is kind of evidence in favor of my hypothesis is more professional bureaucracy. So increasing professionalization increases the effect of decentralization up to the point that even can dampen the negative effect. So like if you decentralize and professionalize, then you can have a better outcome, or you can make decentralization work. It's kind of what I see here. This is a similar story. This is basically in levels. So higher levels of bureaucratic professionalization have overall better outcomes in terms of environmental goods. Basically this type of modeling allows me to have some sort of like simulations. But I can basically see if you increase decentralization and professionalization together, what are the outcomes that you see? And this is like a very brief exercise I do here with 3 different countries. And is the first column is no reform. What happens if you only decentralize? What happens if you decentralize and increase professionalization? And this is on ecosystems vitality. So if you have a similar increase in both, you can have a more likely that your decentralization, environmental outcomes also improve slightly. But if you do the same decentralization reform and also increase professionalization even more, if the potential increase on environmental outcomes is even higher. That's more or less kind of the takeaway from these first exercises that I've been conducting and simulating data. I will leave there some of the discussion. This is basically, yes, I see bureaucratic professionalization matters for decentralization. Some of the things I need to look at next is just regional heterogeneity. I'm looking at aggregate national level outcomes, which is kind of a problem I was complaining about before. But regional level data is very difficult outside of the OECD countries. What I would like to look next is this heterogeneity, the regional level. I will leave it there. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Santiago. Questions to him? Yes,
Excellent presentation. 19 countries fantastic. What do you think explains the result of them if you compare among countries, the more decentralized ones that are out there? And within those countries, if you compare Europe and the less decentralized ones,
I think it's the long-term effect is like while you learn to deal with the challenges of decentralization, these coordination challenges. So first you are introducing more fragmentation. It is difficult to manage, but as you learn to manage this fragmentation in the short run, as you realize how this works, the effects are better. So like that, the promise of decentralization, let's say this is kind of the conclusion, happens in the long run, not in the short run. That's kind of, I don't think it works. It's like you learn to deal with the coordination challenges.
Sorry. So a quick question. So what do you see the differences between the rural area and also the urban area in terms of?
Well, this is a problem. Like I can see that from my data because I'm looking at the national aggregate. I am controlling for urban density, so I kind of see countries with higher levels of urbanization, kind of holding that constant. Like these heterogeneities at the country level, within the country, I can't see with this data. I would love to.
Thank you, super interesting presentation. Following on Raj's question, I mean, it would be super interesting if you could kind of look at the time dimension. I mean, how long does it take then? I mean, if you can kind of track changes in the past and see if that, I mean, if you can check if this long-term hypothesis that you have actually is correct, right?
Right. Sure. No, that would be like ideal to do. I think the time span here is too short for that. I have like 18 years because these reforms are very slow, but it would be ideal. I think like a case study would be easier with this, but absolutely no, that would be a very good idea to explore that.
Another question about what is it the difficulty in measuring local level professionalization? Is just the type of data that you're using, or can you actually access other assets like especially if you see public sector recruitments, their qualifications, or within specific countries? Of course, it may change across countries. You might have to just focus on one or couple on where data is.
Absolutely. I think this measure is an average for the country. This is one of the problems, like the Varieties of Democracy project. Basically, it is a survey of experts. So they ask the expert, what would you say is the average level of patronage in the country? So this is kind of taking into account all levels. So this is a very high level measure. That's one of the key issues. And there's no harmonized data sets for local level professionalization. It would be ideal for that. But you need to, like, I would need to go into each one of the countries. Basically. Not all the countries have this data.
One quick question from me regarding your concept of professionalization. Is professionalization related to quality of government? Is it more professional? Are they always better? Or is it the end you measure that you have more bureaucrats, which might also represent patronage?
Absolutely. I think one of the mechanisms for this working might be because more professionalized bureaucracies imply an increase in the quality of the bureaucracy. That could be a mechanism for this working.
How is it measured?
I also have a control for the quality of government, for the effectiveness of government, just trying to partial out. Yes. Yes, exactly. Which is, it's imperfect, definitely, but I'm trying to partial out that part. Try to see what happened because you have a more professional bureaucracy and is not related to the quality of the bureaucracy. Which is, many of the things might be just you have a more stable staff.
How is the professionalization measured?
what do they, whoever collects that data, what do they put to make sure that this is a more professional bureaucracy and less professional?
Well, here is the varieties of democracy measure, which basically that question to the experts is, how much do you think the hiring and firing decisions are made by politicians?
Mhm.
So it's like, this is the country experts answering the question.
Mhm.
So this, yeah, very abstract.
It's mainly based on surveys of experts.
Experts, yes.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Santiago.
Thank you.
And now we move from the Miguel Dols Fellows, who are famous prize winner, in this case, Paula Granel Ramirez, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Valencia. And we move from, in this case, economics to law, and she's going to be talking about simplification of transfer pricing rules. So the floor is yours, and you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Cañada-Blanch Centre for giving me the opportunity to present my research. And also, I would like to thank the Cañada-Blanch Foundation and the University of Valencia for supporting this 3-month research stay. As Andrés said, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Valencia in the Department of Tax Law. So therefore, my presentation is about this topic, simplification of transfer pricing rules, which is a part of my PhD. So first of all, I will try to give you a brief background on globalization and why it has consequences in inequality. Then I would like to highlight the role of transfer pricing mechanisms and why they are an important tool to this rise of inequality. Then I would try to talk about a little bit about why we need to modify these transfer pricing rules in international taxation. And finally, I will talk about why I think simplification measures can be a good tool to do that. Well, as we know, we live in a period of globalization, and this has a lot of implications, very positive ones in one hand, but among the negative ones, I would say that inequality is one of the most negative ones. The process is quite simple to explain. Globalization has led to an increase on the cross-border transactions between companies, which also has meant a rise of global inequality because the growth in countries have not been the same around the world. Regarding and measuring global inequality, I would like to highlight a report, which is the World Inequality Report, which and from this report, I would like to highlight 2 main ideas that are interesting for my topic. The first one, a very basic one, is that global inequality is one of the most important issues in the 21st century. And the second one is that among all the actors, large multinational companies have been the main beneficiaries of globalization. Well, regarding this final idea, now I would like to, as I said, talk about transfer pricing rules and why they are important in this sense. And I would do that based on an example, a very basic example, regarding 2 companies. Company A, which is located in a normal country with a 25% tax rate in the corporate income tax, and a company B, which can be seen as a tax haven. Company B, which is located in a tax haven with a 0% tax rate. So if we think that these companies do or produce goods to sell them, if those companies were independent ones, and for instance, the market value of the goods that they produce is 1,000, and the cost of producing them is 600, we can see that by doing this transaction, company A would have some profits of 400, and therefore it would pay taxes in the country where it carries out a commercial activity. However, what happens when those companies are related or they are part of the same corporate group? So their objective would be to maximize their profits, by minimizing the taxes payable in those countries. So what they would do is putting a price of 600, which is the same as the cost of producing the good that they sell, and therefore the profits in the country A would be 0. So by this pricing technique, the taxes payable in country A would be 0. So as the main result is that related companies can make commercial activity and make profits without paying taxes in general countries, and especially as I will explain before, this is particularly relevant in developing countries. And we call this mechanism abuse of transfer pricing. Okay, well, this problem has been solved by what we call transfer pricing rules and by the so-called arm's length principle, which means that all these intra-group transactions have to be valued for tax purposes at the market value. So this is the arm's length principle, and it was an effective way to tackle this issue of abuse of transfer pricing. However, more nowadays and in the 21st century, large companies, due to as I said, globalization and digitalization, have taken profit of these transfer pricing rules, and this is particularly relevant to developing countries because they rely more heavily on their corporate income taxes. There are many proposals, I would say, many international proposals that try to tackle this issue, specifically from the OECD perspective. I would like to highlight the role of the OECD transfer pricing guidelines, which are a mechanism of interpretation of these transfer pricing rules around the world. And it is especially important that in 2013, the OECD decided to recognize the role of simplification measures in transfer pricing to give more importance to developing countries in the transfer pricing field, I would say. So yeah, by this time, they said the OECD recognized simplification measures, but they don't have approved any kind of measure. So this gives us some area to make some future tax policy proposals. Okay, well, and I have chosen some empirical data that can, I would say, that can prove that simplification can be a good way to modify those transfer pricing rules that nowadays I think they are not working well. The first data I would like to highlight is that as it has been proven, less developed countries are more exposed to tax multinational avoidance. And this is the reasons that they give is that they have weaker institutions, and they aren't able to control these multinationals' pricing techniques because they don't have or their tax administrations, they don't have a good expertise in this field, as they as some other more developed countries, they have this type of knowledge. And the second idea is that, as it has been proven also, giving or having more complexity in these transfer pricing rules does not mean higher tax revenues in the corporate income tax. And I would like to highlight the example of Chile, because there, after the BEPS project, which was a project from the OECD that tried to say or give proposals to national for national rules to be implementing those changes in transfer pricing. We know that by Chile, by doing that, they will not have more tax revenues than before. So yeah, by saying that, is the main idea is that I would say that having more complexity in the transfer pricing system does not mean a better outcome at the end of the rules, and that's will lead to the role of simplification measures in transfer pricing. And I would, as I would say, I would highlight the safe harbor rules inside these simplification measures. Well, first of all, I think simplification can be a good tool for two main reasons. The first one is because it reduces compliance costs for tax administration, and as I said, this is very important for developing countries because they don't have the tools to apply those very complex rules to particular cases. And the second reason is because simplification measures increase legal certainty, and this is a positive aspect not only for tax administrations but also for taxpayers, because they have a lot of uncertainty when they make transactions and they don't know if tax administration would adjust these results. And I would like to make here a distinction, because I think simplification measures would have a more positive results in small and medium enterprises, because these ones are this type of enterprises have more compliance costs regarding these very complex rules, transfer pricing rules, and therefore they would need the rules to be modified for them. And inside simplification rules, I would like to highlight the role of safe harbor regimes. A safe harbor regime is a provision that applies to a certain taxpayer, and it relieves them to comply with certain obligations that are imposed otherwise by a general transfer pricing set of rules. Here, the OECD has told us which are the factors that can make safe harbors in general in all types of legislation desirable. And these factors are that we have numerous transactions, the uncertainty regarding compliance with a regulation, and if in those situations we find high ex post costs of imposing sanctions on these transactions. And we can say by reading those factors that I would say transfer pricing complies with them, because we can find a lot of transactions that are intra-group transactions, as it's the case in transfer pricing. And obviously we have to face a lot of uncertainty when we try to comply with transfer pricing rules. So I think they are quite desirable in this field. And finally, I would like to say that safe harbor rules have been
try to implement in some national legislations. For instance, in countries like Brazil or Argentina, we can find some methods that try to apply this type of simplification rules to the field of transfer pricing. And these are the cases of fixed profit margins and the so-called sixth method that tries to also use some public information to calculate the margins to be applied in transfer pricing for transfer pricing purposes. So my research would be to try to analyze how these national rules can be transposed to the international field and to and especially in the OECD objectives to fight against profit shifting by using transfer pricing. So that was all. Well, I put some references I'm using, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paula. Question to Paula. Ask.
I have it, sort of, perhaps because I don't know very well how this works, is when you say if you can like basically translate this national, like domestic level laws into the international level, like who will be the international organization or like the agency dealing with this?
Yeah. Okay. Well, as I said, the OECD plays a big role in tax purposes, because they give, for instance, the OECD transfer pricing guidelines are like a mechanism for interpretation of transfer pricing rules in the national level, at the national level, and also they carry out the OECD model, we say, which is the one that a lot of countries or the majority of countries use when they sign double taxation agreements. So by using those rules, those national rules, and implement them in double taxation agreements, which are like if you have all these double taxation agreements, you can say that these are international rules, we can say. So by doing this, by adding double taxation agreements, you can change.
Okay, my question is, go ahead.
But I was thinking, well, I understand, but the enforcement and any power to sanction, who would be in charge? I mean, if it's not internationally recognized,
Yeah,
I guess, you know, multinationals can always try to play their political political power to operate and to, you know, for example, leverage somebody like Trump not to not to comply, for example, in Europe.
okay.
I just wanted to understand the framework, that could be in charge.
Tax enforcement is done by national states and by tax administrations, but it is true that, for instance, the arm's length principle I mentioned, all countries follow this type of rules, even if we don't find like a international administration that poses sanctions on different multinationals. They follow these general principles, even if they have some different type of approaches, I would say. But yeah, and then as I said, like the model which everyone follows is the OECD model. So like even if it is true that there is not an international administration, the national courts will pose sanctions to multinationals if they don't follow the rules. So I don't know if I am.
One quick question from me on, because it goes in the same direction, I think. This is clearly a problem of the global commons. So we cannot regulate and there's no regulation. So the ones that are suffering are the countries in the global south. So if that's the case, why is the OECD, which if you read The Economist or the Financial Times, every time is described as a club of mostly rich countries, taken the lead on this, and what is the UN doing, or let's say multilateral agencies, in this case like the World Bank or the IMF, doing about this, and why are they so inert in this sort of negotiations?
Yeah, it is true. Like the main criticism about this system is that it originated from the OECD in 1923, more or less. And it is true.
1923, there was no OECD.
No, it was the League of Nations.
The League of Nations, because the League of Nations is like the UN, so it's some legitimacy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think now the UN is trying to take a little bit the leadership on tax, international tax law. But it is true that as all the principles were inspired in, for instance, the OECD transfer pricing guidelines and everything, I think it is very difficult that we change completely the system from the OECD to the UN. But yeah, a lot of people are trying to support this idea because they think that at the UN we could have a more fair system, and obviously the global south would be better represented there. So I don't know. I think right now in this year they are negotiating this UN tax framework convention. So I think it's a very important time or period of time, and we will see in the future, in the near future, if this convention is countries would support the negotiation.
Okay, thank you very much. And last but not least, we're going back to the Miguel Dols Fellows, and we have a presentation by Juan Pablo Rodriguez Paredes, who is a PhD candidate at the Autonomous University of Madrid, and he's going to talk about retail digitalization during the health crisis and individual level wage adjustment drivers. So again, as everyone else, 15 minutes, please, Pablo.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for your attention today. Thanks to my supervisor, Coach Beatriz Sanchez. I'm Juan Pablo Rodriguez from Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, and I'm a PhD student. And especially thanks for Cañada-Blanch Centre for the hospitality and the facilities for this research.
It's the other way around. You have to press the other button. Yeah, no.
Okay, this is the outline of the presentation. We talk about the context, the theory, we show the data and the final results and key findings. This is the structure of my dissertation. We focus on 3 chapters. The 5th chapter, I studied the retail resilience in the state level. In the 2nd chapter, I focus on the county level in the United States, the what, and finish today, the talk of today is at individual level. And this is the research in LSE, is the 3rd chapter, and this is the talk today. What is the motivation? Some papers actually research about the shock in 2020 pandemic in the United States, and they studied effects on sales of indicators about productivity, and there are a long papers that study the labor market in this phenomenon. And our contribution is this study, the pandemic shock in the United States, but links with the urban economics. We use microdata, and we use the economics of agglomeration for test this shock in the labor market in the United States. What is the context? Look at the line red. In 2020, the e-commerce share in retail in the United States increased since 11 to 15%. The evolution don't return. Follow this trend. This meaning that the e-commerce we don't come to physical mobility because in 2020 the mobility to physical store reduced to 16%. 16%. This is my shock. This is the shock that I evaluate the disruption of digital commerce in 2020. The retail theory research that have two dimensions: the resilience in retail, bounce back, that is resistance, of adaptive. We research about this theory that the retail have two phases to evaluate. This is the two phases of retail. We can see that sectors called apparel have a big share of retail now. For example, grocery, after the shock, increased her share of retail for last mile or for omnichannel adaptive resilience. And we tested which of two characteristics impacting the wage. If the big high share in retail or the resilience adaptive of the grocery. Our research question is: what dependence on physical formats and vulnerability to e-commerce moderate by omnichannel adaptation capacity, a more important driver of post-2020 retail wage trajectory than agglomeration economies. For link the geographic economy to our research, we use three theories in new economic geographic. We use the first equation is the links the potential market to links to wage. The second equation, we link the employment density from the wage, and the third model we links the mix. We use Mincer equation model that regress the wage with the market potential and density employment. This is the data that we use. We use United States. We use microdata for public microdata using say Puma. Our unit of analysis says individual level, and we use all characteristics for clean the variables, no? Organises, the factors, etc. We have two variables. The first variables dependent are the index of resilience that we construct and the log of wage and salary income over the 12 months. We use typical control variables, sociodemographic, and we use regressors, market potential, and density of employment. We use fixed effects. We use year fixed effects, and we use geographic effects. In this case, we use GEOD, what is the ID of microdata public use in the United States is the Puma. And he used these two variables called fixed effect. In this chart, each polygon represents the market potential in pre-shock before 2020. It's important to see because we need in the second second stage, we need to link the market potential with this graph. This is the density of employment. It's similar to market potential, but density of employment have more percent in different cities. In different cities, we can see that is very pronounced in the east and the west coast in the big cities. This is our empirical strategy. In the field stage, we use equation means model pre-shock. Pre-shock, we use regress the wage with the market potential, density of employment and characteristics of workers, and we fit this model and we create a counterfactual model. This we follow the strategy for Justin Doran and Bernard Fingleton in 2015 that use similar model for the United States. When we fit and create our counterfactual model, we create a parallel world for wage in the United States, and we compare the counterfactual wage with the real wage after the shock. And we is the risk counterfactual with the observer wage in the post-shock, is pre-shock, is counterfactual minus pre-shock. We create an index of resilience in the wage for this period. And finally, our index of resilience are regressed with the same means equation for determinator resilience by our characteristics of our sectors that we use to estimate. This is the results. In the first stage, we obtained a very interesting result because we tested three models for the corrector endogeneity. In the first model, the second model, we estimate following to Legalo and Paez in the paper in 2013, and use a synthetic weighted model. This is our preferred result. We found that 1% of market potential higher to increase the wage in the model, but the problem is that density of employment is not significant. This is a big problem in my dissertation because I tried to different forms to make variables of density of employment or different things, but in all results, employment density is not significant. But we use fixed effects and controls, means controls. With this model, we predict the counterfactual, and with the coefficients, we obtained the determinants of resilience. We tested another time in the second stage, the three models, and this is the determinants of resilience in our model. We found that the market potential protects the wage. Is consistent with the literature, and density of employment don't protect the wage, and the focus on the thesis, my interests are to know the impact of wage on the subsectors in retail. For example, the subsectors that have a high propensity to stay in home, to convert their stores in fulfillment or last mile, have a positive sink, but the lower resilience are the subsectors that need to face interacting with the people. After the shock, these subsectors are the most affected by the shock. For apparel, shipping and network, books, stationery stores. For me, it's interesting, miscellaneous stores and retail trade, not specific, because it's small stores. And it's low significant, it's not very significant, but the sign is negative in two models. It's interesting that the department store have sign positive, and the miscellaneous store, small stores, have negative sign. In this map, we can see the result of resilience model. For example, we analyzed two big states. For example, New York, the polygon red is low resilience, and more blue, and blue is high resilience. For this shows us that where in places where have a lot of density of employment, or minus or more have more density of employment, have low resilience. The most benefited was the peripheral. The big cities don't have to resilience in retail, or don't have to resilience after the shock. The peripheral metropolitan areas, or also towns, small towns around the cities have very resilient. In the United States, this is only two examples, so those two big states. Health index, market access has a productivity factor for wage. Density have a neutral results. It's consistent with the literature. Doran and Fingleton showed the same results. The density of employment don't help to resilience in the United States in the 2008 crisis economic. We found, we don't show in the result, we found the intermediate wage, intermediate occupation, not low scale, not high skilled workers, but intermediate, have very affected for the pandemic in the United States. It's interesting for my work is in progress. For focusing in this case. The principal thing for us is the sectoral difference in the omnichannel structure in this case. The conclusion is that the sectors that have resilient adaptive for transform her installation in fulfillments, mini fulfillments, and adopting a last mile strategies was more resilient, and the sectors in retail with more dependence to face-to-face interacting with the people shows minus resilience. Finally, the limitation, we have a lot of limitation. For example, we need to do a crosswalk for UNAIDS microdata in the United States because the Pumas, the microdata change every 10 years. We need to merge, very good, but we need to merge this area. We don't consider 2020 and 2021 in the model because we need to isolate the impact. But it's interesting. The next month, Minnesota University refresh the harmonized IPUM data, and the next month we can refresh the model for tested the new results with 2024 post-shock tested. We have a lot of problem with computation because the model is we use 8.4 million of individual data, and in the library we use the computer in the library of LSE, and we can to run the full model because it has big capacity. future research, we need to refresh the model, and we need to vary the type of strategy for identify to causal effect. In the first chapter, we use other techniques, econometrics, and we think that this is a good strategy. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Juan Pablo. Questions to Juan Pablo?
I guess I'm very unfamiliar with this topic, so I don't really know what the literature is like. So, like what the literature is like, what the academic debate is. So if you could just briefly explain how you contribute to what's already being written, I would be very
Yes, thank you very much. My contribution is how I said before, they actually papers focus on indicator operating, focus in pandemic, in retail specifically, only are interesting for companies. It's interesting for companies to evaluate sales, productivity, or performance indicator. Our contribution is the focus on our labor market. We need to test. For example, in my first chapter, we analyzed state level. In the second chapter, county level. We need to granularity more specifically for evaluate the labor market. Difference to the other papers that evaluate performance indicators.
I saw the previous slides that shows so high wages does not go into yeah. One of the slides show, yeah, so high wages has next one. So basically it shows like high wages does not guarantee the protection. So I'm wondering if you could explain more on that.
Yeah.
And also, what's the relationship between
This. The dependent variables in this case is the index of resilience that we create with the contrafactual model that we estimate at the difference with the actual wage post-shock. We evaluate the model with no shock, with the post-shock. And we run the model and we found that the signs of market potential have a positive sign. This means that the relations, this variable with the dependent variables is positive, protect the wage because the relation is positive. It is not don't affect the difference on between the contrafactual with the real wage in the post-shock. This is the meaning for protect the wage. It's interesting because in this slide it's interesting because with high the microdata the areas have big high resilience. This is the meaning of protect the wage because we evaluate the wage. This is the market potential with positive sign, and if we focus on New York, you can see is different when we compare it with the pressure model and the contrafactual model. Sorry.
Well, one question from me, which is a bit technical. Why is your R square so low? You have an R square of 1%.
What?
Your R square.
We have 2 R squared in the first model. The pre-shock model we 0.5. With the Puma, it's similar to Doran and Fingelenton. In the determination is less. Is 1.7. It is. I research. It's not incorrect. It's not good, but it's similar to some papers that I evaluate.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Juan Pablo. Okay. Before we finish, just comments. A few comments from me. You come to these presentations, and great presentations overall. We learned quite a lot from different topics. Having said that, my comments are not just, you don't come to just get praises, etc. There's one comment about the presentations and the delivery of the presentations. We come to the presentations mainly here as if you were going to your specific sectoral congress and present to a wider option audience as if they were specialists in your field. That doesn't fly. That doesn't fly very well because, yeah, one of the things is you have to know your audience and who you're communicating with. If you present to a broader audience like this one, in which you have lawyers, you have people from finance, you have economists, you have geographers, etc., as if you were presenting to your narrow disciplinary field, most people are not going to get. You sometimes get lost on issues like, for example, what is the method? And that's relevant, but that's not that relevant for a broader audience. If you're presenting to a wider audience, if you're presenting to decision makers or to people in firms, if you go on like this, you'll last for more than 10 minutes. The audience doesn't last for more than 10 minutes. So know your audience, prepare different sets of slides, and the broader you go, the less you have to go into detail, the more you have to go into what is it that you are addressing, what is the problem, and what is your contribution to society? What is it that you're solving? And that's the most important message. Just convey and adapt your message to your audience so that everyone understands. I always say, if my grandmother cannot understand what I'm doing research on, then I'm not actually doing good research. And in that respect, I haven't had a bad career so far. So just don't hide yourself behind technicalities, especially when you do it to a broader audience. Everyone has to be able to understand you and avoid jargon. Also, one final comment about what is fashionable now, and Juan Pablo put it as not a criticism of you, and what Juan Pablo put in his last slide, which is now very fashionable in economics. What are your limitations? If your limitations are so big, why on earth are you presenting something? No. The ending should be, this is what I contributed to society. This is how I address the question, and this is my main message. You're saying, yes, I did this, but there's this problem, and this other problem, and this other problem, and this other problem, and this other problem. Then my answer, society, why are we funding you? No, you're saying there might be issues in general, but in the end, this is the problem I've solved. And that's it. And end up on a high note. I can, every time I get as an editor a paper that finishes with a whole page of limitations, the paper is best rejected almost immediately. And I know that increasingly it's becoming fashionable. But something that's fashionable doesn't mean that is the real thing. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you that are watching us online or will be watching us online. This is the Cañada-Blanch Centre again. We have fellows presentations every term. And on top of that, a lot of other events that will be coming thick and fast, especially next term. So keep on joining us, follow us on, and Mercedes is in charge, on LinkedIn, on X, and of course on our webpage at the LSE. And now thank you to all of you, many congratulations, and let's go for dinner.